She handed over her passport like everyone else. But seconds later, a gate agent ripped it in half, called it fake, and told her she didn't belong in first class. What he didn't know. She was a federal inspector in disguise, and she had the power to shut the whole airline down. This isn't just a story about discrimination, this is what real power looks like when it stays silent, until it doesn't. Ma'am, step aside. This line is for real travelers. The words sliced through the air like a cold blade. The gate agent didn't shout, but his voice was loud enough for the surrounding passengers to hear and just quiet enough to deny the aggression if anyone complained. The airport buzzed with its usual chaos. Rolling suitcases clicked across the tiled floor. Loudspeakers called out boarding groups. Families hugged, business travelers typed furiously, and flight crews hurried past in formation. But in that moment, just for a second, time froze for Dr. Angela Rivers. She stood there calmly, holding her boarding pass and passport in one hand and her laptop bag in the other. She wore a simple black blazer, dark jeans, and comfortable shoes. Her hair was neatly tied back, her posture relaxed. Nothing about her appearance screamed wealth or privilege, but nothing about it deserved ridicule either. She wasn't loud. She wasn't causing a scene. All she had done was step up to the counter when her boarding group was called and politely hand over her documents. But that's when the agent, a tall man in his 40s with a clipped tone and forced smile, scanned her from head to toe and sneered. "You must be confused," he said mockingly, his eyes narrowing. "This is the first-class line." Angela met his eyes, offering no reaction. "Yes, I know." The agent snatched her passport and boarding pass from her hand. He turned it over, looked at it for no more than a second, then let out a theatrical scoff. And then, he did the unthinkable. In one quick, almost practiced motion, he tore her passport in half. "Orear rip." Gasps erupted from the passengers behind her. One woman whispered, "Did he just?" A man a few steps away pulled out his phone, sensing this wasn't just another travel hiccup. The gate agent dropped the torn passport pieces onto the counter. "Looks fake," he muttered. "People like you always try to sneak into first class." Angela's heart was beating, but her face remained still. Years of discipline and professionalism had trained her for moments exactly like this. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't flinch. She simply looked at the gate agent and said, in a voice both calm and cold, "You just made a huge mistake." The agent smirked. "I doubt it," he said with a shrug, already turning to the next passenger. But what he didn't know, what no one in that terminal knew, was that Dr. Angela Rivers wasn't just another traveler. She was one of the highest-ranking undercover inspectors in the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA. And this wasn't just a regular trip. Angela had been flying anonymously for the last several months, investigating airports and airlines across the country that had been flagged for discrimination, harassment, and racial bias. Her mission was clear. Document behavior, identify patterns, and make sure the air travel system remained fair and accountable. This particular airport had been mentioned in several confidential complaints, many involving gate staff profiling passengers of color. Angela had personally requested this assignment. What the gate agent didn't see, what he never imagined, was that inside her black blazer, tucked into a hidden pocket, was her federal FAA ID badge. And the moment he tore up her passport without cause, he triggered a federal investigation in real time. Angela looked around the terminal. Some passengers were staring, others whispering, a few already recording. She turned her gaze back to the agent. "I'd like to speak with your supervisor." He snorted. "Security's already on the way. You're not boarding anything today." "Good," Angela replied quietly. "They'll need to be here for what comes next." Minutes later, 2 airport security officers arrived. The gate agent pointed her out as a suspicious traveler with fake documents. Angela didn't resist. She didn't need to. As the officers moved to escort her away, she calmly reached into her blazer and pulled out her FAA credentials, black leather, gold lettering, official government seal. Both officers paused. One of them leaned in, read it carefully, then his eyes widened. "Sir," he said, turning to the gate agent, "you might want to sit down." The agent blinked. "What? Why?" Angela held up the 2 torn pieces of her passport. "This is evidence. And so is every word you said to me. You've just profiled a federal officer. And your behavior will now be part of a formal FAA civil rights violation report." The gate agent's face turned pale. But I didn't know. I thought that's the problem, Angela interrupted, her voice still even. You thought. Instead of treating every passenger with respect, you made assumptions based on race, appearance, and nothing more. And you're not alone. I'm here because this entire terminal has a pattern of doing the same. Passengers nearby started clapping. Some even shouted, "Yes, ma'am," and "Hold him accountable." Angela turned to the officers. I'm ready to go to your secure office now. I have statements to write and recordings to submit. My team will be here shortly. And just like that, the story turned. The agent who mocked her now stood stunned and silent. The crowd that once watched passively now stared in admiration. And Dr. Angela Rivers, the woman once told to step aside, had just stepped into her power. Because rail travelers don't need to prove who they are. But when they do, the truth takes off. Angela Rivers wasn't just traveling. She was on a mission. After 14 years working for the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, she had become one of the most respected names in aviation oversight. But you wouldn't know it from looking at her. That was by design. Her job required her to go unnoticed, to fly just like an everyday traveler. No fanfare. No first-class perks. Just a standard boarding pass, a quiet demeanor, and a sharp eye. She'd flown to over 40 states, conducted audits on 22 major airlines, and written policies that affected millions of passengers. Her specialty? Investigating discrimination and misconduct in air travel. If a gate agent treated passengers differently based on race, gender, or appearance. Angela was usually the one behind the scenes documenting it. But this day was different. This time, it was personal. Angela had chosen this particular flight after reviewing multiple complaints from minority travelers about unfair treatment at this airport, specifically at this airline's gate. The incidents shared a troubling theme: minority passengers being denied upgrades, over-scrutinized, ignored, or outright disrespected. So, when Angela received a confidential assignment to evaluate the staff at Gate 43B, she accepted without hesitation. She arrived early. Watched. Listened. And what she saw was everything the FAA had feared. A young white couple arrived at the gate 10 minutes late. Instead of being turned away, the agent smiled and said, "Don't worry, I'll squeeze you in." They laughed together as he printed fresh boarding passes, first class. Minutes later, a middle-aged white businessman stepped up, slightly flustered. He had booked economy, but asked politely if there was anything better available. The agent leaned in and said, "Let me check something for you, sir," before nodding. "I've got you. Enjoy the upgrade." But when Angela approached, holding her first-class ticket and passport, the entire energy shifted. The smile disappeared from the agent's face. His shoulders stiffened. He looked her up and down like she didn't belong. She said nothing. Just handed him her ID and boarding pass, waiting for the same courtesy. Instead, he leaned in and muttered, "Are you sure you're in the right line?" Angela replied calmly, "Yes. Group 1. First class." He didn't move. He didn't smile. He didn't scan. Instead, he stared at her passport for a second, just long enough to create drama, then declared, "This doesn't look right." And before she could respond, he tore it, ripping it right down the center. That's when the tone changed. Angela kept her cool, but around her, people started watching. Phones appeared. Eyes turned. The hum of the terminal dulled into silence around the gate. A wave of disbelief moved through the crowd. She asked for a supervisor. Not loudly. Not aggressively. Just a simple, professional request. The gate agent laughed bitterly. "Security," he shouted instead. "She's trying to start trouble." Angela stayed where she was. Calm. Hands by her side. She knew the drill. She'd seen this happen to others too many times. But this time, she wasn't documenting someone else's story, this time, it was her own. As the commotion grew, 2 security officers began making their way through the crowd. The gate agent smirked as he saw them approach. Angela took a slow breath. She still hadn't shown her badge. She wasn't ready to. Not yet. Because she needed to see everything. Would the security officers escalate? Would they ask questions? Would they treat her with the same assumption of guilt the agent had? Angela took mental notes. Every detail mattered. This wasn't just about her passport anymore. This was about proof. Proof of a culture. Proof of profiling. Proof of a system that punished people not for their behavior, but for how they looked. The crowd was no longer silent. Whispers spread like wildfire. Why would he rip her passport? She didn't do anything wrong. Yo, is someone recording this? Yes. They were. Multiple passengers had their phones up now, recording from different angles. Angela glanced toward one of the cameras and gave a small nod. Not for attention, for accountability. The officers finally reached her. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us," one said sternly. The gate agent stood taller, smug now. "Told you she was trouble." Angela looked the officer in the eye. "Before I go anywhere, I want you to look at this." She reached into the inside pocket of her blazer and slowly pulled out a black leather badge holder. She flipped it open. FAA. Federal Aviation Administration. Senior Inspector. The officer's mouth parted, stunned. The gate agent's smirk vanished. People nearby started murmuring louder. "Wait, she's FAA? She's not just a passenger, she's one of them." Angela didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She spoke with the quiet, commanding power of someone who had waited her entire career for moments like this. "You've just profiled a federal official, tampered with government-issued documents, and denied service based on discriminatory assumptions," she said. "And now, you're under investigation." The silence that followed was louder than any announcement on the intercom. Angela turned to the crowd, then back to the officers. "I suggest we continue this conversation in your airport operations office. I have a report to file. And a team arriving shortly." With that, she calmly walked past the stunned gate agent, no longer the woman he thought he could intimidate. She wasn't just traveling anymore. She was delivering justice at 30,000 feet. The tension in the air could be cut with a knife. Angela stood her ground as the first gate agent crossed his arms, smirking like a man who believed he held all the power. But then, another uniform stepped in. A second gate agent, this one a woman with a tight bun and a clipboard, walked over briskly. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't inquire why the first agent had just torn up a passenger's passport. She didn't even glance at Angela's boarding pass, still sitting, now crumpled, on the counter. She just looked Angela over and said bluntly, "We're not obligated to serve you." Angela's eyebrows lifted slightly. Her voice was calm but firm. "On what grounds?" "I've done absolutely nothing wrong." The agent's response came quickly, like a script she'd rehearsed before. "We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone. Now get out of the boarding area or we'll have you removed." There it was. No justification. No accountability. Just a cold dismissal. Angela had seen this tactic before. In her years working with the FAA, she had reviewed dozens of similar complaints. The phrase, "we reserve the right," was often weaponized to cover up profiling, bias, or just pure discrimination. And now, it was happening to her. But this time, they had picked the wrong passenger. Without another word, the first agent pulled out a radio and muttered into it, "Security, gate 43B. We've got a non-compliant traveler. Possible forged documents." Angela stood still. The terminal, once filled with background noise, now felt like a silent stage. People nearby were recording. Others were just watching in disbelief. Minutes later, 2 airport police officers arrived, walking quickly, hands on their belts. One looked serious. The other, annoyed, like he had seen this scenario too many times. One of the gate agents pointed at Angela. "That's her. Causing a disturbance. Tried to use a fake passport and then refused to leave." Angela turned to the officers. "I'm not causing a disturbance. I simply asked why I was being denied boarding after having my passport illegally destroyed." But the officers didn't seem interested in hearing her side. "Ma'am," one said, motioning with his hand, "we'll have to escort you out of the terminal." There was no yelling. No arguing. Angela knew what was happening, and she knew how to handle it. She adjusted the strap of her bag, stepped back from the counter, and began walking with the officers. But as they passed through the gate area, and more phones turned in their direction, she reached into her coat slowly, deliberately, and pulled out a black leather badge wallet. She flipped it open in one smooth motion. Gold emblem. Federal seal. The letters, FAA. The officers stopped immediately. "Wait," one said, squinting. "What is that?" Angela turned slightly and held the badge up at eye level. Dr. Angela Rivers. Senior FAA Inspector. Division of Passenger Equity and Compliance. The gate agents behind them suddenly looked like statues, frozen in disbelief. Angela continued, her voice still low and steady. "You've just denied boarding to a federal officer on assignment. You've profiled me. You've damaged a government-issued passport. And I have all of it documented." The second officer blinked. "I didn't realize." Angela didn't even look at him. She kept her eyes on the two gate agents now standing side by side, pale and silent. "I wasn't here just as a traveler," she said. "I was here to observe how this airline treats passengers, especially minorities. You've both just confirmed everything the FAA was already investigating." One of the agents opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The other looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. Angela stepped closer, not to intimidate, but to make sure they heard her clearly. "This badge gives me the authority to shut this airline down for discrimination. I've shut terminals before. And with what I've just witnessed, I have everything I need to do it again." Silence. The officers now stood behind her, no longer acting as escorts, but as quiet witnesses. Angela turned to them. "I would like to be taken to your operations office now. I need a quiet room, a secure network, and access to your internal incident report logs. My team will arrive shortly." The more serious of the two officers gave a small nod. "Yes, ma'am. Right this way." Angela took one last glance over her shoulder. The same passengers who had watched her humiliation moments earlier now looked on in awe. Some whispered, "Did you see that badge?" Others shook their heads in disgust at the agent's behavior. A few clapped quietly as she walked past. The agents? They just stood there. Powerless. Exposed. Because in a system where profiling had gone unchecked for far too long, someone had finally checked them. Angela didn't walk away angry. She walked away with purpose. The sliding glass doors of the airport operations wing shut quietly behind Angela as she stepped inside. No more noise. No more crowds. Just a long hallway and a line of nervous employees who now knew, without a doubt, they had messed with the wrong woman. The conference room they led her to was sterile, quiet, and windowless, just the way she preferred it when the real work began. Inside, 3 FAA field agents were already waiting. She had called them in personally, using her direct line to the regional command center. Within 45 minutes of the incident, federal boots were on the ground. The very same gate agents who had torn her passport and dismissed her were now sitting stiffly on the opposite end of the long table, their eyes fixed on the floor, the color drained from their faces. They were no longer smug, no longer in control. The expressions that once held arrogance had been replaced with something far more familiar to Angela after 14 years in her line of work, fear. A monitor at the end of the table lit up. Security footage began playing. There, in grainy black and white, was the whole sequence, Angela calmly stepping forward, handing over her documents, standing still as the agent ripped her passport, and then the second agent joining in to escalate the situation. There was no threatening behavior. No raised voice. No cause for alarm. And yet, the video showed everything. A second clip played, this time, zoomed out. It showed other passengers being helped before and after Angela's encounter, white couples smiling, a businessman upgraded, others waved through with no questions asked. The contrast was undeniable. Angela had been singled out. The evidence was overwhelming. One of the federal officials, a woman in a dark blazer and glasses, leaned forward. "This footage, paired with the formal complaint you just filed, gives us clear cause to open an official civil rights violation investigation," she said. Angela nodded. "And it won't just stop at the gate," she added firmly. "We'll be reviewing hiring practices, training records, internal complaints, and past incidents, especially the ones swept under the rug." The male agent who had destroyed her passport? Immediately suspended. The female agent who backed him without question? Placed on indefinite administrative leave pending review. The airport director arrived within the hour, sweating and pale. He wasn't just worried about public backlash, he feared federal liability. Angela met him with a calm professionalism that made the sting of his mistakes even more uncomfortable. "Dr. Rivers," he said nervously, "on behalf of the airport authority, I want to extend our sincerest apology." She stopped him with a hand. "I'm not here for apologies," she said. "I'm here for change." Within 48 hours, the story had spread. Internal emails were leaked. Passengers who had witnessed the incident posted their footage online. News outlets picked it up. Social media exploded. Black FAA inspector mistaken for fraud, escorted out, returns with federal agents. Woman told to get out of airport turns out to be the one in charge. Gate agent rips up passenger's passport, doesn't know she's FAA. The pressure was now on the airline and the airport. The airline issued a carefully worded press release, citing the need for internal review and retraining protocols. But Angela wasn't impressed. She had seen these PR statements before, hollow words meant to patch over deep cracks. That's why she took it a step further. Angela pulled every complaint filed at that specific gate for the past 5 years. Every traveler who had said they were mistreated, profiled, or unfairly denied service was contacted again. Her team re-interviewed them. What they uncovered was a systemic pattern of behavior, one that had gone unchecked because no one at the top ever paid attention. Until now. This time, the person at the center wasn't just another passenger with no voice. This time, it was the investigator. Angela's calm power shook the system far more than any protest or headline could. She wasn't interested in headlines, she wanted results. In the following weeks, 3 additional gate staff members were placed on leave. The airline was fined for multiple violations of FAA passenger treatment regulations. A federal order was issued requiring mandatory anti-discrimination and de-escalation training across all regional airline staff. The airport director quietly resigned. Angela stood at the heart of it all, not as a victim, but as a catalyst. But even after all that, she knew the work wasn't over. One incident was part of a larger picture. And yet, this one moment had become a turning point, a powerful reminder that silence isn't always weakness, sometimes it's strategy. Sometimes, the quiet woman in line is the one who has the power to shut down the entire gate. Angela never planned to go public. She had never needed to. For over a decade, she had operated in the shadows of the aviation world, monitoring, documenting, investigating. Her victories had always been quiet. No headlines. No recognition. Just policy changes, retraining programs, and the satisfaction of knowing the skies were a little safer, a little fairer, because of her work. But this time was different. This time, she became the story. After the incident, the video footage that had been recorded by fellow passengers at the gate, some of whom were so outraged they couldn't help but hit record, began quietly spreading online. At first, it was a few retweets, a couple of thousand views. But then, the story behind the video was revealed. The woman being escorted out wasn't just another passenger, she was a senior FAA inspector. And the internet erupted. The video went viral overnight. Hashtags like #KnowWhoYou're to, #FlyingWhileBlack, and #AngelaRiversFAA trended across platforms. News outlets picked up the footage, influencers reshared it, and millions watched the clip of a calm black woman being disrespected, only to calmly flip open a badge that changed everything. But when the press finally reached Angela for comment, she didn't take a victory lap. She didn't drag the airline, the agents, or even the airport. Instead, she did what she had always done, she educated. Discrimination doesn't always show up with a raised voice or hateful slur, she said during a short press conference held days later. She wore the same quiet smile she had in the terminal, one that hid strength behind stillness. Sometimes, it's subtle. Sometimes, it's wrapped in customer service. Sometimes, it wears a name badge and stands behind a podium of power. The room went silent. You don't know someone's story just by looking at them, Angela continued. But your actions? They'll always reveal yours. She didn't name the gate agents. She didn't demand that people boycott the airline. Her message was bigger than one moment. Bigger than her. Angela's words hit a nerve across the country. They resonated because they were true. People saw themselves in her story, travelers who had been dismissed, professionals who had been second-guessed, women and men who had been looked over because of the color of their skin, their clothes, their accent. And yet, she didn't respond with rage. She responded with reform. Thanks to her report and the investigation it triggered, that one terminal became ground zero for a complete overhaul of training standards. FAA officials began reviewing other complaint data more aggressively. Airports around the country started mandating bias and sensitivity training not just for gate agents, but for all public-facing staff. And Angela? She returned to work. Quietly. Just as she had before. But something had shifted. She began receiving letters and emails from strangers. Messages from mothers saying, "Thank you for standing tall." From students saying, "I didn't think someone who looked like me could be that powerful in silence." From airline employees admitting, "We didn't know how deep the problem really went until we saw it through your eyes." One of the most powerful moments came from a former gate agent who had watched the video and sent her a handwritten letter. "I was like that man once," it read. "I didn't see it then. But now I do. I'm sorry. I'm learning. Thank you for not fighting fire with fire, but with truth." And what about the gate agent who ripped her passport? At his disciplinary hearing, he had only one thing to say. "I didn't know who she was." But that was the lesson. You're not supposed to know who someone is before you treat them with dignity. You don't wait for the badge. You don't wait for the title. Respect is not something people should have to earn with credentials. It's something they should receive by default. Angela never raised her voice. She never pointed a finger. She simply stood her ground while the world caught up to the truth she had always known. Real power doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it walks through the door, gets dismissed, and writes the report that changes everything. And that's exactly what she did. Final line for YouTube voiceover. Power isn't always loud. Sometimes, it wears a quiet smile, gets disrespected, and changes the entire system from the inside. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you never miss powerful stories like this. Respect, justice, and truth one story at a time. Thanks for watching.